Hi, everybody. My name's Kimberly Maize, and I am a trauma resolution expert. I am the creator of the Trauma Response Syndrome model and a previous clinical social worker turned trauma revolutionary. I am proud to introduce my daughter and co host, Savannah Woodard.
Thanks, Mom. I'm Savannah, a second-generation trauma specialist, a trauma-informed coach, and care advocate, and together we are a new generation.
We are a mother daughter powerhouse duo determined to decrease the stigma of trauma and bring focus to healing transgenerational trauma through open conversations.
Please listen as we share our story on how we healed transgenerational trauma through radical self-awareness and responsibility.
Because remember, when families heal,
Society heals.
thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a New Generation podcast.
Hi, everybody.
Just as a reminder, we are currently in a 5-part series on perspectives. The last couple of episodes, we shared our own perspectives on what we call the divide, which was an 18-month-long period of no contact. The first episode was a daughter's perspective. I shared my perspective of the divide. And the following episode was the mother's perspective, where my mom shared her perspective of the divide. And today we're going to be talking about how we went from that extreme way of thinking to beginning our process on repair and how we got to where we are today. And we're going to do my perspective and her perspective next episode. And then the 5th and final episode of this 5-part series will be a more clinical approach of how opposing perspectives can exist at the same time in any given relationship. And what needs that meets, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that I want to say is I want to address the fact that we haven't had a podcast episode in about a month. And, I just want to be really transparent. Holding space for my mom during that last episode was extremely difficult for me. In the moment, it was difficult, but even the weeks following, I feel like I had to face a lot of truths about myself and how much my perspective affected her, which really made me think of a lot of the other relationships that I've had and how my extreme thinking and extreme trauma responses influence those around me. And it's just been really hard. I needed some time to be able to integrate that. And my first instinct is to apologize to all of you, but I don't think that's appropriate.
Oh, I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah, I think that's not appropriate. I think that it's good for me to show that, these emotions are real. This is our life. These are our real life experiences.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sorry that I took time to integrate. I'm going to cry. I'm actually very proud of myself that was so hard for me. And I'm still showing up here today. Because I could have guilt, I could have shame, I could feel bad, and I'm really just trying not to.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Because you're allowed to see things we're allowed to see things about ourselves that don't imply that we're bad people, right? Trauma motivates our behaviors, and that does not mean it's a fault or a character defect or something wrong with us. It's how we learn to survive and get our needs met, and it's nothing to apologize for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of what I had to process, because you all will learn, and those of people who work with us in our offices know that a big part of the work that we do is a trauma response syndrome model concept, internalized blame of self. And I definitely internalized that episode. I definitely felt like a bad person after that. It did feel like a character default. And I wanted to make sure that I could work through that trauma response to come to what you just said.
Good job.
Because my rational mind knows that, but my inner child felt so wounded and upset, as if I had done something wrong, that I didn't deserve to do this podcast. I did that. I can't believe I did that. I don't deserve to, educate people and help people. I don't deserve that. I'm saying that in quotes because I know that that's not true. That's just a coping mechanism that I've used for a very long time to internalize something as if I did something wrong. And now, sitting here today, I recognize that I had to do that in order to survive. I had to see things that way. And we're going to share a lot more of that in the fifth episode of this series of what needs that met and why people do the things they do, and why we have to have such extreme perspectives to justify the things we do. So stay tuned for that. So with all of that being said, here we are, we're back, and we're going to really try hard to be consistent and show up here every week. And if we don't, we're not perfect. We're just going to try to do that. So yeah, today let's get started on opposing perspectives. Yeah, is there anything else you want to say before I dive in?
When you were saying that you were internalizing, I'm a bad person, I did that. You were internalizing. What were you internalizing about that episode?
I think that the fact that I didn't recognize that my behavior could affect you so much
Oh,
made me feel like I was being hypocritical in saying that I care about you, and how could I possibly do something that led to that happening to you?
okay.
You know, like, it made me question myself.
Mhm.
It made me question myself and my reality and everything that I do. When it's like, how could I have strongly believed something so strongly to the point that I was willing to allow that to happen to you with no remorse at the time?
Okay.
And that made me feel really bad. Now I can see why I did that, because it was for survival. But, like, truly, I don't ever want to hurt you like that. I don't want you to have to go through things like that. And I thought it was my fault. I was like, wow, I did that to you. And now I'm recognizing the situation did that to you, rather than me, which is very difficult for people. I've seen a lot in my office, and just, obviously from what you've taught me, my own experiences, that we are separate from our adaptations. We're separate from our trauma responses. And it was just hard for me to recognize that, because, like I shared with you, I don't think I've shared here, I literally felt like a little kid when you were sharing that. I regressed. I felt 12 or 10 or 12 during that conversation, and probably for a week or two after. It took me a while to become an adult again. And I was definitely a child when that was happening. So, but now I can say I rightfully had those experiences because of everything I've been through. Of course, I regressed in such a difficult situation. And that was only a year after my husband had taken his life. And like I've shared on here, if you guys haven't gone back, there's a lot of information on family system roles, transference onto my husband. And I felt like when he died, because I had transferred so much onto him, when he died, I went back to the place I was before I had met him, because none of that was really resolved. And so I've really had to resolve a lot over the last month, and really do a lot of reflection and change things in my life to be able to show up here today. And I'm honestly really proud of myself. I've taken more radical responsibility in the last month than I have probably my entire life. So
yeah. And I appreciate that. One thing that I do want to add to that is, we talk a lot about repair, and one of the goals of this podcast is to show how people, relationships, families can heal and repair. And we often focus on the responsibilities of the parents, because it's the parents' responsibility to recognize how their trauma impacted their parenting and therefore their children. That's primary. And I've been thinking about, like, I've been doing this work for a couple decades now, and working with families, and it's and listening to dynamics and family systems and those kinds of things. And most often the focus is on the child needs to be validated and heard and healed, and that's true. And we don't often talk about how a parent sometimes needs to be validated as well. and from a child. And I never received any validation from a parent or a caregiver. And so that isn't something that I receive most often. I don't receive that, but I receive it a lot from you now. And, it's deeply healing for me in this relationship and this repair that you were able to even see. Now I'm going to cry.
Me too.
That you were able to see what that experience would have done to me emotionally, mentally.
Yeah.
Because your defenses were so high, and it was very extreme and very cold. And that first year was probably one of the I've been through shit, I've been through it. And that was one of the most painful and difficult years of my life. And because I felt that you would never see me or see the part that you played in this dynamic. And you really have, you really have in the last year.
Try really hard.
And to hear that you had that much of a visceral response to me sharing that really makes me feel seen. And I don't get that very often. So I appreciate that.
Glad. Oh, I didn't think this was going to be an emotional one. But it's important that we recognize, that first year after the divide was really hard for both of us.
Yeah.
And it had to happen. That's something that I think is difficult for families, is that we have to do the really hard, messy work.
Anger,
Sadness, grief, rage, those things are necessary. And that's a lot of what I've been doing recently. It's interesting how much this impacts the work that I do in my office, in that I've been really trying to validate my clients and their anger and their rage, and allowing them to learn how to express their anger. Because if I hadn't done that during the first year of the divide, what we're talking about today wouldn't have happened.
Right. Me neither.
Yeah. And that's something that we were talking about yesterday and today as we're preparing for this episode, is, what it meant to really process to get to a point where we could be self-aware. And so before I share how we went from a place of pain to a place of repair, I think it's really important for us to recognize what happened during that first year. I really couldn't consider you at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like now looking back, I'm like, wow, I'm really sad that it had to happen that way. But it did have to happen because we had been enmeshed for so long, and I had abandoned myself for so long. Never in my life had I really had the opportunity. I mean, a little bit here and there when I was an adolescent, which we talked about. But for the most part, my first instinct was to protect you, make sure you were okay. So even if I was expressing anger, it was very superficial. It wasn't from a place of like, I really need to be seen and heard. I need to really be angry about these things. Because quite frankly, I had a lot to be angry about from my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why all of this happened during the divide was because I had never been seen before, and I had never had that space. I was, I
secondary.
Felt secondary. Yeah. So, yeah, we were talking about a little bit of like, what were the critical steps in our relationship and during that divide that allowed us to eventually get to repair.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. Is I had a really good therapist. He was good for me. And he really allowed me to be mad at you. He really held space for you to be a perpetrator.
To the point that he was, he did, which, the
We attempted to use this therapist as our family therapist when I still lived in Boulder.
Which now looking back was inappropriate. He should have said no.
He should have said no because he was not capable of holding space for me and my experience. And he was triggered by me. That was my experience. And he was so aligned with Savannah as he should have been. But some of us are able to be in the middle and see the perspective 100% from both sides, which I think I'm very skilled at doing. I don't know if he was new. Was he a new therapist? I don't know. I mean,
no, honestly, I think that it was just meant to be.
Yes.
I think I needed him to hate, or not hate you, but I needed him to see you as a perpetrator because I didn't even know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know how to see you as a perpetrator. I couldn't articulate it. Like I could feel it. I knew what was going on internally in my response to it, but I really couldn't figure out exactly what was going on. And I feel like he was really able to help me see that, and it was just meant to be.
I'm not saying at all that what he did with you was not what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
I'm saying we were further estranged as a result of therapists not being able, more than one, not being able to help us in the time that we lived together.
Well, and to be honest, I think that's a lot of the culture right now.
Even though they said they would and could.
Yeah.
That's the point, is they both said, I can completely do this. This is what I do for a living. This is what I'm skilled at. And they had well, he might have had capacity, but he was triggered by me, said inappropriate things. He needed to just be your therapist, and he should have recognized that. The other one, I just don't think she had the skills.
And she was new.
I don't know if she was new.
Yeah, she was. This would have, like when we talked to her, it was only her second year out of Naropa.
Well, she did not know how, but she said she was trauma specific in nonviolent communication.
Well, that's what all of Naropa said.
She knew nothing about nonviolent communication. I'll tell you that right now. Literally nothing, and said that was her specialty.
I think she was triggered and shut down because I mean we were a lot at the time, not too much. It was just a lot.
We were emotionally intense, but if you can't hold space and assist people who are dysregulated and emotionally intense, which that's not a derogatory term to me. Of course, we're emotionally intense. Then don't say that you're a trauma therapist.
Correct. And just to go back a little bit of what I was going to say in regards to him and a lot of people, I feel like our culture right now, and a big part of what we want to change through One Planet Healing, is this perspective that when people are toxic, you cut them out.
Yeah.
And I think that was a lot of his framework and a lot of his thinking was that you were too toxic and he needed to protect me, which is not appropriate. No. But that's a lot of what's going on out there, is that for the first time, people are starting to recognize my parents' behavior or my family system's behavior affects me. And so therefore they're toxic and we need to cut them out. And that recognition is great, because for a long time, people just didn't know what was going on. They were doing all this talk therapy and didn't really understand how trauma affects our behaviors. And so that's good in a way, but we're here to take it a next step further, of that we can recognize that someone's behavior impacts us without them being toxic, right? Without needing to cut them out.
Right.
Of, okay, you affected me negatively, and there needs to be recognition for that. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're toxic and I should cut you out.
Because I showed you with changed behaviors and validation. Right.
Which takes a skilled therapist to recognize, or trauma specialist, trauma worker, depending on the situation. It takes someone who's really skilled to be able to do that. And that's why we so badly want to train more people to understand we can talk like this. We've had a rough month after that episode of me feeling triggered and dysregulated and not really knowing how to communicate because I was regressed. And we were able to still work through it because we know that we want to have a relationship in the long run, even if we have a tough time. And if there were more families out there that came from that perspective, right, of, okay, you hurt me and I hurt you, that doesn't mean that we're not meant to be in a relationship. It just means we have to have very difficult conversations.
Right.
And it'd be really nice if someone could hold space for us during that. But there's really not enough skilled people out there that we've found anyway.
And we have
tried.
We've
tried. I just did a TikTok recently about getting turned away from 4 therapists because they straight out told me, your trauma is far too complex for me. I don't understand developmental trauma to the extent of what you've experienced, and I just can't help you.
Which I want to say, good.
Yeah, good for them.
Thank goodness.
But then I'm left without a therapist.
Right. I applaud people who take ownership of, I am not trained or skilled enough to work with you. I say, well, considering the extent of trauma in the world, that's possibly some training you might want to get. But I'd rather them say they couldn't help you than say they could and re-traumatize you more, which is what more often happens. But then, yes, you're left without somebody that can help you.
Which now I think I have found someone who's been in the field for almost 20 years. She feels like she can handle me. So let's see how it goes. I start next week.
I do want to add one thing, that you and I had 2 times this month. Really, we were not getting along, and we were like saying, we've got to do something different or we're not going to make it. And now I know a lot of that had to do with my hormones, because now
we've done a lot of things to try to fix the situation.
Feel like a different person all of a sudden. But I had to mentally say, I need to be softer and kinder, and because you were telling me I felt like you don't like me, and that broke my heart. That's not okay to me. And I was exhausted. There weren't excuses, but I was not doing well.
Yeah.
And I was agitated a lot because I was exhausted and hormonal, and I needed some help, and there wasn't any. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm too exhausted. I can't do anything. And, and that makes us irritated at people. But I had to make a conscious decision to hear what you had to say and be able to receive it without internalizing blame and going into shutdown, and just say, wow, that's not okay. I can change that behavior without shame. And that's what a decade of, working with each other to try to get to this place has done,
Well, and then you did it.
Yeah.
And then she was able to hold space for me because I expressed, I can't do any more than what I'm doing right now. I'm feeling so overwhelmed by everything, all of these hard truths that came from this episode. I'm having a really hard time being an adult. I'm having a really hard time holding space for you. I recognize that as adults, I should be able to do that. I literally can't. You have to soften up and hold space for me for a while so I can come too. And she did, and we repaired, and that's why we're here. Honestly, I feel like that those interactions could have debilitated all of this.
We had 2 very intense
fights.
Yeah,
there's no other way of saying it. And
you've been going through so much, though.
Yeah,
with the case, all of it.
Yeah, it's been really rough. And as a result of that, this is hard for me to say, but I'm going to say it. I went on an anti-anxiety medication for the first time. And I tried to go on medication in college. I had serotonin syndrome. They instantly made me suicidal. And so I've been treating it with alternative medicine, which has worked up until this point. And I feel like The extent of my trauma overpowered the capability of alternative medicine, and I had to go to urgent care. I was having such extreme panic attacks. I was losing control of my behavior, and I went on medication. And to be honest, I was really resistant to it, and now I'm doing better than I've done in a really long time. It's working, thank goodness. And
So what's the difference between now and then? What it's like your decision to go on medication was very informed. Informed consent.
mhm. I did research myself, hours of research. Why would those SSRIs cause me to be suicidal versus a straight anti-anxiety medication? So I was very informed. I did my own research before going to urgent care. So I knew when I went to urgent care the medication that I thought would work for me. And then when I got there, I was very able to advocate for myself. I said to them, I do not want benzodiazepines. I do not want an SSRI. I'm very, very sensitive due to my trauma, due to being completely sober, due to my neurodivergence. And so I need a very small amount. And I had to educate the doctor on what was going on. And she was very receptive. And she even
After she tested to see if you were drug seeking.
yeah, she did offer me benzos, and I said absolutely not, to the point that I was about to leave, and she said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I do not want benzos. I feel as though you don't have the resources that I need, so I'm going to wait. I'm going to make a doctor's appointment even if it takes a month. I do not want those. And that was a signal to her that I was truly in crisis and not drug seeking. And she said, because of the extent of what you've been through and what you're saying about these medications, I need to refer out. And so she called somebody who was a psychiatrist, which I'm mind blown that in this day and age, an urgent care doesn't have a psych person on staff, which is just mind
No,
blowing.
you have to go to the emergency
You have to go
room.
to the ER.
Then you're treated like you're a drug seeker and a crazy person and all the things.
But that doctor said, I do not feel comfortable having you leave here. I recognize you don't need the emergency room. You're one of those people in the middle. And so I'm willing to prescribe what you need. I'm only going to give you 15 days worth to ensure that you do go to a doctor, because she didn't want to be liable. And then she literally pulled up the medications. There were 3 medications that the psychiatrist recommended. 2 of them, I said, absolutely not. I will not take those because of past experiences that I've had in my life. And so let's talk about booze part. She sat there, she pulled her computer up, pulled it up, went through every single one, because I wanted to make sure that suicidal ideation wasn't a side effect, which it's not. And we went through all of it. This is how much you should take in this instance. This is how much you should take in this instance. She asked me, are you comfortable with this amount? And I was really impressed with her. I was a little disappointed that she didn't really know what I was talking about as far as like serotonin syndrome and how an SSRI would cause that. But she was very willing to help me and work through things and help me be more informed before I left there. And I'm proud of myself for advocating for myself, because I got what I needed. And I did not have the extreme response I had in the past. I did hallucinate a little bit in the first couple of days, but my mom was there to support me. My mother-in-law was there to support me. And I changed some other things in my lifestyle that I think were affecting it. And so now I've been on it 3 weeks tomorrow, and I have not had a panic attack in 3 weeks. And I was having multiple panic attacks at different levels for every week. So for that to be able to say I've had no panic attacks in 3 weeks, and I was doing everything alternative medicine before and still having panic attacks. So I think it's important to say that there's a time and place for Western medicine, and it's not necessarily an emergency. It's just a time and place for it. And I don't know if I'll be on it forever. Maybe I'll be on it for a year and be okay, or maybe I'll be on it for the rest of my life. And at this point, I'm okay with that, with no judgment. So I'm proud of myself that I did it.
I'm proud of you too.
And the level of less anxiety I have during this session right now. Can you tell? I feel less anxious
all the time.
It's crazy. So
Very important disclaimer here. We are not offering any kind of medical or mental health advice. We are simply sharing our personal experiences. We are not saying people should or shouldn't take Boost Par. That's not what that's something that worked for Savannah. It may or may not work for someone else. That's a decision that you make with your doctor or prescriber. We are well aware of prescribed harm. We're aware, survivors of prescribed harm. We understand that there are horrible side effects and withdrawals to psychiatric medication. We are not anti-psychiatry. We are pro-informed consent and pro-choice on people being fully educated to make their own decisions. They should have the right to have alternative medicines and Western medicine. That's our belief. And Savannah made the informed choice to go on this medication.
And I honestly think it saved my life. So
yeah.
So,
and it may not work for other people. So
you do you. You decide. We just hope that more doctors and more helping professionals become aware of what's going on, so that people have the right to advocate for themselves and feel that that's welcomed in their office, in the offices that they're going to. And that's the most important thing to us, I would say, is that people have the right to choose.
Yeah, we are the ones who are in control. We are the ones who need to make our own decisions about how we're treated. And so we're the ones who decide what medication we go on, and we're the one with informed consent, and we're the ones who choose what diagnoses we have. If we have to go into the mental health system,
that was the other
informed diagnosing.
That was the other thing, is they were trying to diagnose me with GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder. And I said, the only thing I'm comfortable with is PTSD. That's the only thing I want on my record. And she deleted it and showed me her computer and took it off. And then I went back to the doctor just recently to get my refill. And I said, can you please show me all of the diagnoses that are on there? And the only one was PTSD. So, what's most important to me is that people have the right to advocate for themselves and know what's going on.
Yep.
And, just have the opportunity to be able to do that. So, I think that's a big reason why I went through this. I learned a lot about this. I had never had a whole lot of my own personal lived experience of medications. I've had a lot, obviously, through you and through my first husband, Curtis. And so I feel like this provided some lived experience to help all of you and people in my office and things like that. So I'm really glad I did it.
And I am glad too. And, if you are somebody who doesn't feel like they're capable to advocate for themselves, we also work as advocates. If you need somebody to help you navigate the system, the mental health system, know what to do and say, or if you need somebody to help you and talk with you and talk for you, we work as advocates as well. So we know that there are circumstances where people aren't capable of doing that yet. So back to our topic of
a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
So
we got off topic a little bit,
but it's good. It's all relevant.
Yes.
So one of the things that really shifted me from going from a pain place to a place of repair. So the first thing that I had shared was my therapist. And just so you all know, I'm referring to an email that my mom wrote. For those of you who are just listening to the audio, this is also we're also on YouTube. So I'm speaking to those of you who are watching on YouTube. If you see papers here, it's just notes that we've worked on, and the email that my mom wrote that really shifted things. So we're going to get to that later, but I have some notes here. So the first thing was a therapist that validated my experience through enmeshment and really held space for me. The other thing, the second one that I want to talk about is the shift in my relationship with my grandma. We've talked a lot about our triangulation throughout the years, and that my mom was seen as the perpetrator, and my grandma and I kind of took turns on who was the rescuer and who was the victim. And I feel like during the divide, for the first time, my grandma really acted as a mediator, as a rational, non-biased person who even leaned more towards my mom being the victim. And because I had never experienced that before, just the change in that relationship dynamic, I was just kind of like, huh. At the time, it didn't really hit me as much as it hits me now. Like, a lot of this is us looking back and realizing what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, I was like, oh, okay. My grandma would say something. She'd allow me to be really mad. And then she would say things like, wow, Sav, that's really cruel. Are you sure that's how you feel? For her to say something like that and to protect you was just like, wow. And holding me accountable. She had never held me accountable because I was always the victim. As a child, I think that's part of it, is that now I'm an adult, so I need to be held more accountable. And another thing that was going on at that time was that I was starting to be in a healthy relationship with my now husband, Marvin. At the time, we were just starting to date, and my boyfriend. And when we moved in together, so we moved in together about a year after the divide happened. And I had spent that year, being really angry and processing a lot of these feelings of enmeshment with my therapist and allowing my mom to be my perpetrator. And after that year, because I had done all that work and I had worked through that anger and rage, I was starting to see, okay, maybe I do have a part in this situation. And Marvin started saying things to me that challenged him, that were similar to what you were saying my whole life. Like things like, you can be so stubborn, you only see things from your perspective. He would say that, and I would be like, well, I'd be really defensive at first. But then I was like, oh, wait, those are things that my mom had said. Or there's a lot of those examples, but just once he started saying things in a way where, because we were in a more well-adjusted dynamic, he would say things more to educate me rather than hurt me. And so Curtis, my first husband, who we've shared was mentally unwell and going through so much because of his chronic illness, he would say things, but it was more from like a, I want to hurt you in an argument place. And so I couldn't take it seriously. When Marvin said it in like a, Sab, this is challenging for me. I don't know what to do. You just won't listen. You just only care about your perspective. What are we going to do? It wasn't like, oh, you're doing something wrong. It was like, I don't know if I can do this. And the thought of losing him, especially to something that my mom had said my whole life, I was starting to be like, again, it was just like this, like I wasn't quite ready to listen, but I was just like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know. It took a while for it to sink in. So I think between my grandma and Marvin and Curtis, all of them were saying similar things to what I had refused to hear in my relationship with my mom. It all just started to sink in, where I was like, okay, maybe I do have some responsibility here. Maybe there is something here. There's something to what they're saying. And then to further that, I started talking to my dad. I was talking to my dad again for the first time since I was a kid. And I started seeing things in him that really frustrated me. And I started to recognize that the things that frustrated me about him were the things that my mom and Marvin and Curtis had been saying. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm more like my dad than I thought. Then I started realizing, when my mom was really frustrated with me, you would say, God, you're so much like your father. And I would get so defensive because I didn't really resonate with my father. And I thought fairly negatively of him because he had hurt me so much. And then I started again being able to take radical responsibility without internalizing it. I started to realize, oh, wow, okay, I see my dad doing these things. My mom says I'm like my dad. Now everyone's saying that I'm doing these things. And it was just like these ahas over and over again. And that's when I reached out to you saying, you know, I feel like I've forgiven you. I'm starting to recognize these things, but I don't know if I can trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And started to open the conversation up, and that it's not that you're a bad person, it's that there's a lack of trust here, and I don't know how to talk to you about these things. Like, I'm starting to realize maybe I am doing things that are affecting you, but I don't feel safe enough to talk to you about it, type of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and then the final, well, okay, so the one thing too was that I was getting medical care. So I've shared on this podcast that I had extreme issues with my cortisol, my progesterone, my estrogen, which a lot of people refer to adrenal fatigue, although that's not an actual medical diagnosis. People who experience adrenal fatigue know exactly what I'm talking about, where my doctor measured my hormones, and at 31, I was basically in menopause. And my cortisol was way too high. My estrogen and progesterone were way too low. And I started taking, estrogen suppositories. I was putting progesterone on my wrist. I was taking like full blown adrenal supplements like bovine and all sorts of other things, D, and all of these like magnesium things to calm my nervous system. And as I started to get more rational, I started to be able to see, oh, wow, how irrational I had been over time, right? Like, you don't realize it's happening until it's fixed.
Yeah.
And then you're like, holy shit, I've been acting like a complete lunatic. I don't know how else to say it. Just completely irrational, emotionally intense, reactionary.
Understandable reactions to your experiences.
Yes.
Although
they hurt those around me.
Yes.
So this is, again, like how two opposing things can be true at one time. My behavior was somewhat justified because of what I was experiencing, and it's not justified that I hurt you the way that I did.
Yeah.
But being able to see, oh, wow, I'm starting to feel better. Holy shit, how have I been acting?
And that's what I felt like I had been doing for decades. Of 2 decades.
Yeah.
When I first started getting treatment, trauma resolution in 2003, and I felt like nobody sees this. Why is nobody seeing me?
Mm-hmm. And now it's everywhere. The effects of trauma on the nervous system is just like everywhere now. People are really starting to recognize.
And it was nowhere.
It was nowhere. Yeah.
And I was a lone
Well, you were
sailor.
A leader,
a pioneer.
Yeah, pioneer.
Pioneer.
So yeah, so those are kind of the 4 things that was going on. And then the final thing that really shifted me was this letter that I have in my hand. And it's a 9-page letter that my mom wrote to me for around Easter, what we call Ostera in our culture, in our ancestry. And which is a time for new beginnings, a time for spring, a time of setting new intentions and renewal. Yeah, which even just that really resonated with me, because that's something I would do and that she would know is important to me. So for you to write me during that time with that intention, I was like, oh, wow, maybe she does see me. Like, it was like a reminder of the things that I loved about you. I had spent a year being so mad at you and so frustrated. When you sent that to me, I was like, oh, yeah, that's my mom. Like, she does know me, and we do have positive things in common. So I think that was a smart move on your part.
Even though she said, don't talk to me till May 1st.
Yeah, I said, don't reach out to me, because I had sent an email before, like I had said, talking about wanting to repair or not being able to trust her. And I said I needed some time to integrate, and so you can reach out to me by May 1st. And she reached out. It would have been April 17th. I have written down here.
So what's interesting, which we'll talk about in our next episode, my perspective is that the way that you see the email that you sent me is completely different than how I interpret it. You're saying that you sent me an email saying, you know, I'm seeing these things about myself and I don't trust you, but maybe we can work. That's not at all how I saw that email, because you were saying other things that I perceived much differently. I did not see that as a
positive.
No. Not really.
See, that's so bizarre. So
Mm-mm.
crazy. Interesting. I shouldn't use the word crazy, but so so going to the email that you sent, I think this was the pivotal turning point for me. And I even said after you sent this to me, which I'm really proud of myself, I said, I've really been working through my hormonal issues. My nervous system is thrashed from everything I had been through, Curtis taking his life and then the divide. And I need more time. I need a lot of time to integrate this, to make sure that I'm responding from a rational, grounded place. And then you responded, thank you for that rational and grounded response. Take as much time as you needed.
Yeah.
And that type of interaction was very new for us.
Yes.
And so even just that of like, okay, we're both recognizing that we have very strong trauma responses, and maybe it will take a really long time to repair, but we're both willing to be patient with one another and loving towards one another. That was a really big deal for me.
Yeah.
So I went through this email the last couple of days, and I've been really soaking it in. I highlighted very specific things that you did and said that allowed me to shift from feeling scared to that we could repair.
Okay.
And a lot of what that was for me throughout the entire letter, you validated my experience and said, I now see how that's very true for you. And it's not the same as it was when you were a kid. Because a lot of what my perspective has been through this whole time was that because we were being re-traumatized, it felt very similar to the dysfunction when I was a kid.
Which infuriated me.
And that was really hard for me because I felt like your anger meant that what I was experiencing wasn't true.
And no.
And now I can see that both things can be true, that it infuriated you and you can see things from my perspective, which is a lot of what this email was, okay, I can see how you got to this perspective, and let me tell you how it could be a little bit different from that.
Yeah.
And the main thing was that I felt like my mom was so unpredictable and so emotionally intense that she could never change. For her to write out a 9-page letter that made sense from the beginning to the end, that validated me through the whole thing, it was consistent through the whole thing, I was like, okay, this is a different woman.
Which is so bizarre to me that it's like the person who I see myself as the person who I was then when you were a child and growing up. I mean, I hadn't been hospitalized in like 15 years. How could you not? You know what I mean? I was like, how come nobody can see that I'm a completely different person?
Well, and I think that's because I had bypassed it with my relationship with Curtis through transference.
Yeah.
And so when he died, I went back to the place before I met him, which was very unresolved. I was 20.
And I had just gone through psych drug withdrawals.
Yeah.
And was disabled for about 5 years from it.
Yeah.
And you were taking care of me.
And I was taking care of you. And then, like we've talked
to a certain degree. I mean, not completely, but.
And like we've talked about here too, when you got a surgery in Boulder and I had to caretake you, we think that's what really sent me over the edge.
That was the trigger point. Yeah.
And understandably,
that was like 3 months before the divide, 3 or 4 months before the divide.
Yeah. And like 9 months after Curtis had died. So it's just kind of like a shit show.
Yeah, bad.
I mean,
and and it's interesting because I had said to you numerous times, I won't be able to walk. I won't be able to take care of myself. You'll have to bring me food. Do you remember me saying that before I got the surgery?
Kind of.
Yeah. And I'm like, you understand, you'll have to like bring me food. I won't be able to walk. But then, the damage was so bad to my foot that I ended up being in a cast for like 10 weeks, in a boot for like 8 or 10 weeks. And
it went a lot longer.
They said it was like really worse than they thought. And so it went on and on.
Well, and I feel like this is a true testament to our rational mind saying one thing.
Right.
And trauma motivating our behavior subconsciously.
Yes, it is.
And being, regressed as a child, rationally trying to say one thing and just being fragmented. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. Being so debilitated by a drinking problem, by my husband dying, by our problems. I mean, there's so much going on. I mean, my poor brain, my poor body,
Your poor little girl.
yeah, like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's a lot of things here where in this letter, you're talking about, like, you need to take care of me, the feelings of coming second to mine and being too mentally unstable to care for myself. Much like in your childhood, never knowing if I was going to be okay or not, perhaps I was going to live or die. For you to say that like straight out, I was like, okay, maybe she's capable of seeing my perspective and I need to try harder.
No.
I need to try harder. Because, there were times in my life, like you said in here, where you allowed me to be mad at you. You allowed me to scream at you. I remember in our Kelly house, there were certain things where I was upset with you and you said, you know what, Savannah, I'm going to sit here and you just scream at me. And I just remember just screaming and screaming and screaming, and crying, and you hugging me. And, the fact that you had done that showed me that you were capable of doing that.
Yeah.
And I was just so discombobulated and so fragmented that it wasn't linear. Right. Like if I was linear inside of myself, which is one of the most important things I feel like for those of us who work with those impacted by trauma, is we expect people to just go from being one way and going from another. And that's just not how it works. We get better and then we regress, and then we get better and then we regress, and then we kind of plateau.
2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 to the side.
And that's definitely what was happening to me, was that I would get a little better and then something would happen, I would regress. And, we were faced with so much trauma over the years.
Over and over and over. It never, yeah.
And we've talked about that a lot, that we feel like we would have repaired a long time ago if tragedy wouldn't have kept happening over and over. Even just your foot surgery not going well was kind of tragic. I mean, you were stuck in bed. It was just all these things.
Well, and I think, like we had talked about before, and what I mentioned in the letter was that I think we were, I had gotten a Habitat for Humanity house. We were living, you had your own room, I had my own room. We were living in a little house. Was I working yet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went inpatient to the trauma unit for 30 days. When I got back, I was doing better.
Weren't you at the White House?
And then I went to the White House to work after that. And then
not the White House.
Not the White House.
I just don't want to say the company because we're not allowed, but it was a youth center in a big White House that everywhere, and everyone in Ames where we lived, they referred to it as the White House, which is where people went to go get treatment. So I just want to make that clear. We're not politicians here.
It was a inpatient residential treatment center for adolescents.
Yeah.
And doing pretty well. Still very fragmented and dissociative, but trying to work. And then Chad and we got together, and he moved in and
took his life.
And then he took his life, and that was about it. That's what did it.
And that's a lot of what you said in here. Like, a lot of these highlights say, to you, it likely felt the same as it did when you were a kid, even though it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And for you to be able to say that this is what was actually happening, but I recognize what it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
For my emotions to be validated like that, I feel like that was a really pivotal thing. And I took this letter to my therapist and I was like, let's break this down, because I feel like she's really trying to validate me.
Oh,
and
I didn't know that.
he was able to do that. So I think that our emotional intensity probably triggered him in the moment. And so he wasn't able to do the same things he could do when it was just me and him.
Yeah, he said some inappropriate things.
Yeah. So, yeah, there were a lot of things in this letter. I don't know how much of it I need to say, like, specifically. It's 9 pages long, so we probably won't do too much. But again, here it is. I'm sure that felt similar to your childhood, even though it was the same. The feelings about having to take care of me, again, for you were too much. And the fact that you were saying things that I had, so that was the other thing I haven't mentioned yet, was that a lot of what you said in this letter, I had already realized in therapy.
Mm.
And so for you and I to be on the same page was like, I felt like that was a breakthrough
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of why I did the extreme things that I did in the past, the divide was not the first extreme thing that I had done to try to find control of the situation. So like I was saying, one of the reasons why I had always done such extreme things was because I felt like there was no way you and I could ever be on the same page. And so I would do these really extreme things to try to find control of the situation. And once I started to see, oh, wait, you know what, maybe we could get on the same page, then I didn't have to be so extreme. And when you were validating my experience, like, oh, we're thinking the same thing, it started to work through that core belief that you and I would never be able to get along. And it was kind of like, oh, wait, I don't have to control it to feel safe in this situation. We can actually talk things out and it's okay. It's going to be okay. And there's a lot of that in here where it was like, oh, I already came to this conclusion in therapy. She came to this conclusion on her own. Maybe we do have a chance. It's not like I have to convince you or I have to fix the situation. It's like it could just naturally kind of come back together. So yeah, it was just interesting to really look through this and see, okay, we actually do think a lot alike. We actually do come to the same conclusions. And I don't have to be controlling the situation to be okay. So yeah. For you also to be like, I knew that I had hurt you so bad and you were still able to love me after that. This was a very loving letter. It was very matter of fact, like very straightforward and fact driven, which you say a lot in here. You were like, I recognize that in the past I was too emotional to be able to just talk straight up about facts. And you were like, so I'm going to try really hard to keep my emotions out of this and just show the facts. Because a lot of my core beliefs were that you were too emotional for us to have a relationship. So for you to say something like that, I recognize I'm too emotional, or that I'm emotionally intense. Maybe not too emotional is the right way of saying it, but that my emotional intensity kept from us being able to communicate non-violently. For you to say, okay, I'm just going to take my emotions out of it and just share the straight facts. It was very reparative for me.
Good.
So again, you said things like, you had to take care of me again. I know this would have triggered your childhood issues. Why wouldn't it? I mean, just to say things like that of like, yeah, she's right. Wow, she does see me. She does recognize me. Yeah, and it was just this was the other thing when you told me that you were no longer on disability. That was like, holy shit. We went through all of this and she got off disability. Wow. Okay. Sav, there's something wrong with you.
That makes me cry.
Yeah. I was like, Savannah, what is wrong with you? Like, you're over here having a mental breakdown. Your mom's getting off disability. Like, what is going on?
I've been on and off disability for 20 years. And during the divide, I had built my business up to the point that I made the conscious decision, which was a very hard decision because I had excellent insurance, Medicare and Medicaid, and I wasn't going to get the money, and I trusted in myself enough to tell the Social Security Administration that I no longer qualified for disability because I wasn't mentally ill.
Which is pretty amazing.
And the lady said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Pretty amazing.
That's a pretty proud moment.
Yeah, and you said here, I'm living in Ames in my dad's old house with my dad next door to my mom, and I'm good mentally. Please read that again. I am mentally well and doing my best to try and create a life with joy in it. I went off disability because I believe in myself. And I was like, wow, okay. Yeah, like, holy shit.
I feel like such a grown up. I mean, it was so integrated.
I know, like, wow. And that's what this letter
so integrated. I was DID and I was so integrated in adult.
Yeah, that's what really struck me in this letter was like, wow, this is a rational adult woman talking about facts and not this emotionally intense teenage person that I had been trying to communicate with that it felt impossible to try to communicate with you about things because we were both so emotionally intense. And for you to like take responsibility, and this felt like my mom. This felt like a mother reaching out to me and trying to repair and not be right, not prove me wrong, not feel heard, validated, and seen. You know, I was like, wow, this does not feel trauma motivated. This feels like straight rational facts. And then you pointed out some things that my therapist and I had also discovered about trauma-based control thinking, you know, this extreme all or nothing, believing perceptions are fact instead of thinking of all the possibilities. Only one perspective is true, believing that you think something is true and therefore it automatically is. That trauma-based, control-based thinking was my dad.
Yes.
And so for you to say those things, I was like, wow, this is what I've recognized in my dad over the last year.
Yep.
And there is a chance that because I have his genetics strongly, I mean, like I look a lot like him and I think a lot like
Your
him.
brain is like him.
My brain
is a gift.
Most of the time.
Thanks for the genes.
Yeah. That's about all I've gotten from him.
Yeah.
But yeah, and she said, I'm not discounting how you feel. I'm asking you to take a step back, detach from the emotions, and look at the facts. For you to say things like that was just different than I had experienced. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's why I did such extreme things, because it felt like nothing would ever change. Mm-hmm. And so for this to be different, me to feel different and see things differently, and you to be saying things that are different, it was just a huge shift in our relationship. And I think the pivotal thing that really allowed me to go from fear-based thinking to repair.
I appreciate you saying that. And it just kind of hit me that like I and you as also in your own life and experience, I mean, I was filled with such rage after what happened, such rage. And to take a year and a half and then get to that space and for you to do the same, I mean, that's miraculous. Mm-hmm. And so many people with the toxic perspective, the rage is it. You stop at the rage, you shut down and push away, and that's it. Now, I do want to clarify, we 100%, as we've mentioned many times in this podcast, we 100% of the know that there are many people and family members that you have to cut out. There's no other option. But our hope and belief is that there's many, many more families that can do what we've done. Maybe they need help. Maybe they need assistance in doing that. But if we can, other people can. And it just takes some radical acceptance and responsibility and awareness and shifting the way that we view ourselves and our trauma responses. Instead of like, you know, I'm a horrible, awful, shame-filled parent for what I did to you, which I felt that way for many years, which led to suicidal ideation, that we can shift that perspective to, I was traumatized, and of course, it affected my parenting, and that's okay. I wish it didn't, but it's never too late to repair. And I want to do that with my children. That's a parent side, you know? And for children to be able to see their parents as humans, maybe, after they've seen their parents as perpetrators and work through that, can you possibly get to a place of, I can have compassion for my parent? That does not come before your own experiences. We don't go from, I was a traumatized, you know, my parents were traumatized and that's why they did the best they could, and now I have compassion. That leaves out all the child's experience.
Well, and I feel like that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we train more people, because it takes a very skilled professional to be able to meet people where they are and facilitate resolution while being mindful of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You know, I've had clients in the past who over empathize and have compassion with their parents. And I've had people who are so upset with their parents that they don't ever want to talk to them
That's
again.
usually the two.
And, you know, I'm working with people even right now who have been working through, they first had to work through the empathy where I've literally had to say to them, I think that you've empathized long enough. Let's talk about you for a while.
Right,
how do you feel? You know, let's be a victim. Then bring them back to that place to then be able to see their parents as humans. You know, it's hard to facilitate that, especially when our own shit as helping professionals are getting in the way. A lot of, you know, those of us who work with trauma survivors are trauma survivors ourselves. That's why we're, you know, called to this calling. And we're getting triggered and dysregulated trying to help them. So it's really important that us as those who work with people impacted by trauma are mindful of their own triggers, work through that
100%.
to then be able to meet people where they are. Because if I still was upset with my mom and had all this rage inside of myself around my mom, I would never be able to help people have compassion for their parents. And if they've been in trauma resolution work for, you know, doing direct care for a year or two, after a while, it's not conducive to be upset with your parents. You can't really fully heal unless they're narcissistic, abusive people that you just need to radically accept you're going to be mad at them forever. And eventually forgive them or not.
And sometimes, you know, regardless, if we can't help people, assist people to get to a place of radical acceptance, if we're so enraged at our own families and we're working with people and we can't get to a place of radical acceptance, because it's either, you know, the helping people get to a place of radical acceptance, whether it's I'm going to radically accept that I need to cut this person out, or I'm going to radically accept what happened and try to repair.
Well, and some people also choose to radically accept their parents as they are and never get repair and just take them as they are. You know, there's people that are like, I don't think my mom will ever be able to hear me. She'll never be able to validate me, but I cannot stand the thought of getting married one day and her not being there. I would rather her be at my wedding as a narcissist than cut her out entirely. And so to be able to meet people where they are and help them in whatever way serves them, it's different for every person. That takes a really skilled professional to be able to do that.
And we can help people understand ways. My relationship with my mother is a prime example of that. 100%. My mother, and I have it on my phone, texted me today and said, I just want to tell you I love you.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the response, I haven't responded. It makes me uncomfortable because that doesn't feel safe to me to some degree. Because
does it feel fake?
She's not capable of loving me the way that a child needs a parent at all. But we have worked on repairing our relationship in the last decade to the point where I completely accept what she's capable of giving me and what she's not. I don't expect anything from her. So what I get is what I get. And she has re-traumatized me in the last 2 years living next to her because of who she is. But I do believe that she loves me as much as she's capable, authentically.
Yeah, and she really tries.
She tries
That's the
now. I
difference
mean, she
between
tries
to
to
the
the
best of
point
her
that she's
capability.
capable of trying. She still gaslights me. She still victim blames me. She still uh, has said very mean things to me over the last couple of years. But that's because she is not capable of seeing and doing her own trauma work.
Well, and it's interesting because as I become more aware of our family system as a more adult perspective, I've had moments of we need to hold her accountable. I've said this
Mhm.
to you. We need to hold her accountable. We need to tell her why we're upset. She needs to change. And you've just said, Sav, she's 70 years old. I'm not sure if she's really able, and you need to decide.
Mhm.
Do you want to radically accept her as she is, or do you want to fight with her for the last 10 years she's alive? And it took me a little while, and I decided I'm probably just going to let it go.
Because I made that decision in 2010 to some degree. Either I cut my mom out, which would mean cutting, because you were still aligned with her. Because when I started doing my own trauma work, and you start shifting your internalized blame of self around, talk about rage. Oh my,
I remember.
rage.
I remember hole in the basement with the acrylic paint spraying everywhere. You trying to release that anger so you could have a relationship with her.
Well, no, I wasn't trying to have a relationship with her at that point.
Or like find some resolve.
I was trying, I was for the first time realizing that I almost died as a result of her decisions when I was an adolescent and a kid. And the rage, man, I was full of rage for 3 years, throwing clay at the doors, and I mean all the rage.
I remember
in the fetal position,
hearing it from upstairs.
I was crying and screaming in the fetal position, all the abandonment and stuff. But my brother was still very enmeshed, and you were still aligned. So I cut her out. If I were to cut her out, I would have lost my family system, my daughter and my brother, and my dad at the time. But that wasn't as, I would have lost everyone. And I wasn't willing to lose you guys. I wasn't willing to lose my brother or my daughter. And so I didn't cut her out completely.
Are you glad that you didn't?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of why we're doing this series, is to really recognize that there's all these different perspectives and things going on at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And if people
Yes.
are able to slow down, let things breathe, work things out internally
Take some space.
before making big
Mhm.
decisions, right?
Mhm.
Like, because a lot of times if you cut someone out, you can't really repair that. I
Mhm.
mean, without this type of work. I mean, we've done really intense work.
I mean, people go, well, the ambivalence. I mean, there's extreme ambivalence where we cut people out and then we go back in,
Yeah.
cut people out and go back
which
in.
is re-traumatizing.
Which is 1000% understandable. And it's just re-traumatizing. It's like, okay, if I cut my mom out, I'm going to take some space, let things cool down. Then I'm going to go back in with one of the strongest motivations for behaviors is maintaining family systems. 100%. How do I have to abandon myself to go back into this relationship? Because that's essentially what it is. I'm going to abandon myself again and go back in and not have any boundaries, believe me, I've held my mom accountable. See, that's the other difference is I have told her, you cannot say that to me. If she gaslights me, I say, you are gaslighting me, and I hang up. I no longer have any re-traumatization. I will hold her accountable. And, for many years, I'm like, I was never mentally ill. Your decisions nearly killed me. This is what happened to me as a kid. She doesn't validate me. She doesn't say, she'll say things about like, well, if you say that's true, it must have been true. And I don't really want to think about that. Like those kinds of things. Because when you have Savannah and I as family members, You're not getting
Our poor family.
You're not getting away with trauma responses.
Kidding.
It's not happening. It's just so it's not like I just abandoned myself and let my mom in my life. No, that's not it at all. I've made it very clear how our relationship's going to be. And if you want to be in my life, you will not make comments about my weight, my food, all the things, and that's what has to be done to be able to have people in your life. It's not just like you go do your trauma work, you could find radical acceptance, and then you abandon yourself still. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying what we're hoping is that parents can learn to take responsibility and validate their children, which also means
doing the work,
recognizing their own trauma, which is one of the biggest motivations for behavior, is avoiding and denial trauma. And I think, and this is for a future episode. I don't want to go into it because it's in our
8-part series.
It's in our last perceptions of why people hold on to their perceptions and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And
then we're going to also do an 8-part series soon in the future where we're talking about all of these, how trauma motivates our behavior and the needs that get met. We have a lot of really great stuff planned coming up. And so, next week it's going to be the same topic, but from my mom's perspective, and talk about how we went from a place of pain to repair. And unless you have anything else to say, I think this is a great place to stop. What do you think?
I think it is too. We're hoping that my brother is going to come on in a future episode. He's really wanting to do that. We hope we can make that happen. That will be very interesting. To hear his perspective.
Yeah, because we all were raised by similar, by the same people, and all have very different experiences, and so it'll be interesting to see his perspective in the future to come. And it's just an honor that he wants to be here with us. So that's going to be really cool. And so stick around. Next episode will be our 4th episode in a 5-part series on perspectives. We'll be talking about a change of perspective, part 2. That's the episode next week. And thank you all so much for the support. We've had such great feedback and so much support from all of you. We just really appreciate it. And we're so happy that we can be here to educate and serve all of you. And thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.